Well, Hippocrates actually said 2,500 years ago that he believed that all disease begins in the gut. And how that guy knew that long ago is amazing, because nobody had done the Human Microbiome Project. But the more I've researched this over the last 20 years, the more he was right. Not only was he right that all disease begins in the gut, every bit of research now, particularly since the Human Microbiome Project was done, has pointed to the fact that these inhabitants of our gut and the relationship they have with our gut wall probably is what causes heart disease, what causes autoimmune disease, what causes brain disease, and I can elaborate what causes joint disease. So what I've found with my research with actual patients now for 20 years is not only does all disease begin in the gut, but all disease can end in the gut by fixing the gut. Well, one of the things that I found, and I certainly wasn't the first person to describe the mischief that lectins can cause, lectins are plant proteins that are called sticky proteins that is a part of the plant defense system against being eaten. And believe it or not, plants don't particularly want to be eaten. They have a life and they don't want their babies, their seeds eaten. So they protect themselves by using lectins. And what's exciting, Dr. Fasano from Johns Hopkins first described how gluten, which is a lectin, can cause leaky gut by actually breaking the connections between the cells of the lining of our gut. And one of the ways lectins wreak havoc on us is by producing leaky gut. What's even more interesting is that research shows that lectins can actually climb the vagus nerve into our brain and cause Parkinson's, for instance. And now there's some really exciting research that lectins cause leaky brain. Leaky brain refers to the fact that normally we have a blood-brain barrier where there is absolutely no way to get into the brain in the normal sense of the word. That's why, for instance, in chemotherapy for brain tumors, we can't give chemotherapy injectable and get it into the brain because it can't get across the blood-brain barrier. What has been shown is that lectins can actually break the blood-brain barrier and cause leaky brain, brain fog, for instance, Alzheimer's, for instance, other forms of dementia. Believe it or not, probably MS is caused by a leaky brain. We now have several patients that we can spot this on these new tests. So that's the bad thing about lectins. Polyphenols, on the other hand, are actually used by plants to protect themselves from harsh conditions. For instance, sunlight. Sunlight burns plants, and they produce primarily in their leaves and their fruits as a protective mechanism. In fact, the beautiful colors we see in the fall is actually the chlorophyll leaving the leaves, and the polyphenols are actually shown with all those beautiful reds and oranges and yellows. Those are polyphenols. Yeah, so the major lectin-containing foods are almost all of the grains that have a hull. And that can be wheat, it can be corn, it can be buckwheat, it can be quinoa. There's two grains that don't have a hull, and that's sorghum and millet, so those are actually safe. The bean family in general have the highest concentration of lectins, and there's a new paper that just came out showing that cooking, actually heating beans, does not destroy the lectins. You actually have to use a pressure cooker to destroy the lectins in beans. And the nightshade families, those favorites, potatoes, eggplant, tomatoes, peppers, even goji berries. In general, the peels and the seeds contain the lectins, and many traditional cultures have always peeled and de-seeded their tomatoes and peppers before they eat them, making them much safer. In terms of polyphenols, the dark colored fruits have a lot of polyphenols. And believe it or not, Raspberries and blackberries have far more polyphenols than the ever popular blueberry. The polyphenols in the blueberry is in the skin, but blueberries have been bred for sugar content, so now even our organic blueberries are about the size of grapes, and most of them now are sugary rather than having a lot of polyphenols. Well, first of all, so much of research is done on rat and mouse models. And believe it or not, rats and mice are grain predators. They're designed to eat grains. They actually have 10 times the amount of protein degrading enzymes that we have. And so, since lectins are proteins, they tolerate and can degrade lectins extremely easily, whereas we can't. So if I wanted to design a research study that shows how good grains are for you, I'd get a bunch of rat and mouse models and show how well they do. On the other hand, when you look at traditional cultures, most traditional cultures have always had a way of figuring out how to deactivate lectins or at least make them less. They use fermentation, they use soaking, they use heat, extended periods of heat. And all of these go a long way to reducing the lectin content of these foods. We've just forgotten that because we're so busy now. Well, so, and I travel a lot in Italy, in the south of France, and in Europe in general, looking at traditional cultures, and also in China and Japan. And these cultures have figured out ways of dealing with these lectin-containing foods. Most places in Italy, for instance, they soak their beans for 48 hours and they change the water every 4 to 6 hours with fresh water because the lectins will come out of solution. And many times they'll cook their beans for days at a time. And the longer you cook these things, again, the more lectins are deactivated. The Okinawans use a little bit of rice, but the rice they use is actually white rice rather than brown rice because they're taking the hull off of rice. So traditional cultures have always figured out a way to lessen the lectin content. Plus, the things we don't realize and the things my critics don't realize is that the traditional cultures, even in the blue zones, have not been exposed to antibiotics like we are, have not had their animals fed antibiotics like we are, and have not been exposed to glyphosate, Roundup, which kills off our intestinal bacteria. So they've got a wonderful defense mechanism against lectins that we no longer have. Well, the problem with most probiotics, the vast majority, and these are bacteria, most probiotics are destroyed by stomach acid. And so the vast majority of probiotics that people consume, for instance, in yogurt, the actual living bacteria are long since dead by the time they get into our intestines. Now, that's not to say that the cell wall of bacteria, dead ones, may have an effect, because they do. But to think that we're actually seeding with living bacteria is a misnomer. The other thing that most people don't realize is that almost all probiotics, the bacteria in capsules, are not part of our native flora. They're not part of our gut flora. They actually vacation for a couple weeks and then leave. So that doesn't mean that they're not important, but we put far too much emphasis on probiotics. On the other hand, prebiotics are the long-chain sugar molecules that good bacteria, the probiotics, actually need to survive and grow. And my research and research of other people has shown that it's the prebiotics that, if you had your choice, are far more important if you were going to take one of the two. Give bugs the things they need to eat, and that's prebiotics. Yeah, there's been some really good work on the microbiome of the Hansa tribe in Tanzania that microbiome, the collection of gut bugs, changes seasonally, and it completely changes from one season to the next. And their microbiome has been compared to more modern Western societies where our gut microbiome is almost constant throughout the year. And I think we have to realize that up until really the last 100 years, we've only done seasonal eating. And there was only fruit in the summer. There wasn't year-round fruit in most of the world. Even in the jungle, as my research has shown, great apes only eat fruit once a year in the summer, and they only gain weight once a year during fruit season. So the idea is we really should have circadian rhythms with seasons. And that's why when I tell most people, please don't eat much fruit, but if you're going to eat fruit, eat it in the summer when you were designed to eat it, not in January. Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you an interesting thing. We do travel to Europe quite a bit, and we decided to start looking at the changes in microbiome, not my research, but others. And even a 8-hour time change will completely change the circadian rhythm of the microbiome. This microbiome has circadian rhythms, and there's new research to suggest that jet lag is actually nothing to do with the time change affecting us, but it's the time change affecting the microbiome that makes all the difference. So recently, my wife and I have loaded up with a couple of my products that are now in travel packs, and I'll give a shameless plug for Vital Reds and Prebio Thrive. So we'll load with Vital Reds and Prebio Thrive the minute we hit a different time zone. And we've been shocked that we no longer have jet lag. So I think there is at least our anecdotal evidence is that there is proof that the microbiome circadian rhythm may be behind jet lag. Well, I'm glad you asked that because I have an advisory role with a company that works in light, and I've been absolutely beside myself that they will not concentrate on red light therapy for the microbiome in the gut, because there are beautiful papers that show that red light therapy alters the microbiome in a positive way. And if I was somebody like Joovv, I'd concentrate all of my Joovv light on the gut to change favorably in the microbiome. They are sensitive to light. Number one, the more olive oil you can get into your mouth, the better. One of my favorite sayings, we're going to ask, I'm sure, about a Gundryism. The only purpose of food is to get olive oil into your mouth is probably my favorite saying of all time. Prebiotic fiber-containing foods, and these are actually easy to obtain. Primarily, one of the best foods are foods that contain inulin. And inulin is contained in radicchio, which many people kind of know as that Italian red lettuce. Chicory, Belgian endive is full of inulin. Artichokes are full of inulin. Also, yams. Yams are one of the best ways to feed friendly bacteria, as is jicama. One of the biggest food myths is that all the blue zones are blue zones. These are the longest living people on Earth because they eat lots of whole grains and they eat lots of beans. And that's absolutely positively not true. There are multiple blue zones that eat almost no grain, almost no beans. So that's absolutely not true. The Adventists, where I was a professor at Loma Linda for most of my career, actually pressure cook and extrude their soy into what's called texturized vegetable protein. So they don't eat healthy soy, they destroy it and destroy lectins. Resign yourself to getting about 4 tablespoons of olive oil into your mouth every day. High quality, organic, first cold pressed, extra virgin olive oil.